Well, I'm now an atheist. Let me explain how this happened. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. It happened because of an exchange in the comments of one of my videos with an atheist named Randy. He showed up after someone whose channel for low-intelligence atheists, called The Skeptic, did a video making fun of one of mine. By the way, that's not me trying to denigrate the channel or its viewers. It's the channel description. A newish channel, making atheism and skepticism more acceptable to a wider audience. A lot of the atheist community, in my mind, sound really smart because of the huge words and fast-paced rebuttals they use. It's not all like that. You can be like me, not overly intelligent, and look at why people believe things, then question it, simply, yet effectively. Anyway, I'm going to show you this shocking exchange, which destroyed my worldview, then explain the profound effect it had on me, and why. That said, I want to assure my viewers that it's not going to change the sort of videos that I make on this channel. I've been told by atheists many, many times that atheism is just a lack of belief in God, and that it has no consequences of any kind. So, now that I'm an atheist, I'd be a hypocrite if I let it affect my life in any way. Since atheism doesn't change anything, and since the sort of videos I make is a thing, being an atheist won't change that. If that weren't the case, it would be possible to reason backwards from consequences, which would mean that atheists would have to intellectually defend something. Which we don't, since we're the people who use reason and logic. The reason atheists say the same thing over and over again is because Christians can't answer it, and they know it. Like, for example, answer this if you're a Christian. Do you believe it's moral to own another person? If not, please explain Exodus 21. You hear things like that a lot because it melts your religion. It's simple to explain Exodus 21. At the time, God asked of people what they could do, getting them ready for doing better, much like how Moses allowed divorce. It's interesting how God has the power to outright say that murder, stealing, and of all things, eating shellfish is explicitly prohibited, which was also happening at the time you're referring to. However, your God doesn't have the power, presence of mind, ability, or, in my opinion, the moral compass to put a ban on slavery. This sounds like someone hopelessly interpreting verses to fit a particular narrative. I would also encourage you to discuss your ridiculous proclamation with Christian scholars, because they would disagree with you too. Also, how does Moses allow or disallow anything? I don't recall anywhere in the Bible where it mentions Moses as someone who can just command people as though he was God. You're completely wrong about the interpretive tradition of the church about sacred scripture, what you call with Christian scholars. And your opinions as to what the ancient Israelites could be called to and what was too much for them are uninteresting at best. You claim to have read the Bible, but can't recall where in the Gospels people asked Jesus why Moses permitted them to issue a writ of divorce. Still haven't answered my question. Do you believe owning another human being is moral? I have no interest in arguing with you about your weird interpretation of the Bible. Please cite credible resources from other theists supporting your opinion on the matter. Otherwise, it's just you pretending to know what you're talking about. What you are saying are quite literally your opinions, too. You're no different, so let's not pretend you are the source of biblical interpretation. Please answer the very simple question I asked you in the beginning of this post. Also, can you explain to me why Jesus never delivered any changes to Exodus 21 when he was on the mound, or any other time? Do you think it's because Christians should still be following these words? If you don't believe that you should, then where does it say in the Bible that treating people that you own, slaves, should be done any differently? It certainly doesn't suggest that slavery is immoral, or else your all-knowing God or his sacrificial lamb, Jesus, would have said something about it. Why do you think he would allow slavery and just encourage people to do better, but outright ban stealing? Seems a little ridiculous, doesn't it? And a few hours later, when I hadn't responded, he followed up with, and silence. The usual Christian response. It was that last part. The way that he completely saw through me really convinced me that atheists are the smartest people to ever walk the earth, and consequently they must be right about the position that they don't hold, and the proposition that there is no God that they don't even claim is true. How could he have known that I didn't reply for a few hours, not because I concluded that it was as productive to talk to a wall as to talk to him, nor that I was just busy, but because he had completely demolished my worldview by brushing it aside? Clearly, he only gained this astonishing certain knowledge of what was really going on because he merely lacked a belief in God like a newborn babe, but definitely not like a rock. I'm not quite sure yet what the difference is between the non-existence of belief in God in a rock and the non-existence of belief in God in a newborn babe, but I've been assured from other geniuses like Randy that the difference is so extreme, it's laughable to even ask what it is. The difference is so extreme that you're a bad person for even asking. So stop it. That said, the part where he saw through me not answering him for a few hours wouldn't have done it on its own if it hadn't been for the deft way that he brought up the sacred scriptures that no Christians ever read, like the book of Exodus. Yes, Randy forgot to point out where the Apostle Paul told slaves to be obedient to their masters by human reckoning, and that masters should give their slaves what is upright and fair, because they too have a master in heaven, instead of saying that slavery is the worstest thing ever and should just immediately be abolished. That just made his critique all the more devastating. It was just a momentary lapse, though, and Randy did have the presence of mind to say that the Sermon on the Mount never specifically abolished slavery, and there's no getting around that the Sermon on the Mount was, more than anything else, a political speech, primarily concerned with outlining the ideal legislation for all times. It further devastated me when Randy contrasted laws which required masters to treat their slaves decently and provided at least some rights for slaves, but which were not an outright prohibition, with the law that forbids stealing. Despite the fact that were stealing permitted, you could not have even the rudiments of a functioning society, and most people would die of starvation if they didn't fall prey to animals, while you can have a functioning, if deeply flawed society with slavery, Randy's groundless assertion that if you can forbid stealing, which approximately everyone acknowledges is wrong, you can certainly forbid slavery, which has widely been considered natural and was especially so considered in the ancient world, really just showed me how wrong I was about absolutely everything. It's truly amazing how merely lacking a belief in God can give a person such tremendous and clear-sighted insight into what people can and cannot accept, and how irrelevant what their own society was like at the time is to that. It also made me rethink everything I ever thought about God and Christianity when Randy didn't recognize a well-known passage in Scripture. I've been told many times that atheists know the Bible far better than Christians do, but I'd never seen how much that's true until now. Him having no idea what I was talking about showed without doubt that I misremembered sacred scripture in order to try to reconcile fitting into my culture with all of those embarrassing parts of scripture that clearly show that it wasn't written earlier today. The scales fell from my eyes when Randy showed me that the right way to deal with something like this is not to try to understand it, but to casually dismiss everything you don't understand and then boldly assert that you know what God would do if he was as wise and good as you are. So, I guess I have nothing else to say, but until next time, don't bother aiming because there is no mark to hit but the one you draw, and that will work better if you draw it afterwards. Well, except that this is the internet, so I should probably add that all of the preceding was meant ironically. You can call it sarcasm, if that is more intelligible, except that I don't mean it to hurt anyone. The etymology of sarcasm is interesting. It comes from a Greek verb meaning to tear the flesh off of something, sarkos being the Greek word for flesh. I'm doing this because this sort of thing, brash rhetoric devoid of any interest in considering anything, used to bother me a lot when I was a teenager. Teenagers don't have the life experience to be confident, and this sort of thing would get under my skin. It's been decades since then, and at this point it's kind of mildly amusing and not really much of anything else. But I know that sometimes teenagers do watch my channel, and I've done this video because I want to help them see how empty this kind of thing really is. And it really is remarkably empty. The very same people who will argue till they're blue in the face that atheism is merely a lack of belief, that is, that it is not a position about the world that can be true or false, but merely a psychological state in the atheist, will also complain that you're using ad hominems when you ask them to prove that they will actually believe if presented with evidence. They want you to attack the position, not the person, but also tell you that they have no position, but very much want you to know about them, the person. The problem is that they're rhetorical thinkers, so they don't notice that it makes zero sense to simultaneously claim that they are not making any arguments, and also that you're ignoring their arguments. They genuinely don't realize that if atheism is a proposition about the world, then one can discuss whether it is true or false, but if it's merely a psychological state, the only question you can ask is whether it's a defective or healthy psychological state. The thing that we see so often, and in the example earlier in this video, is that their mind moves all the more swiftly because they do not understand what they are saying. Since they don't think, they don't have to take the time to think. Since they don't understand anything, they never pause to find out if perhaps they've misunderstood what someone said. Probably the best example of this is when they don't understand something and call it word salad. They have so little experience trying to learn that they assume that anything which they don't understand has no meaning. The reason all this can be intimidating is that such a person is either completely wrong, or likely mostly right, and if they were completely wrong, wouldn't they have run up against something that gave them pause before now? The answer is no. This sort of internet atheist, there's nothing remotely unique about Randy and my interactions with him, is simply so impervious to learning that no experience ever makes an impression on them. And bear in mind, these internet atheists are self-selected for having something driving them to seek out Christians with whom to fight. There is an enormous asymmetry between Christians and atheists in this regard. Christians can want to bring the good news to atheists because atheists are dear to God, and perhaps for any given one of them, God has given it to us to be his helping them to come know him. An atheist has no reason to try to bring the bad news that there is no God to anyone. And indeed, if you know ordinary atheists in person, you'll notice that they don't do this. It doesn't interest them because it makes no sense for them to do it. If someone mistakenly believes in God and it leads them to try to be more generous and kind, why on earth would an atheist try to talk them out of it? That's the attitude normal atheists tend to take. If someone really wants to talk to them about God, then they just try to avoid those conversations. On the internet, it's trivially easy to not watch somebody's videos. I found that if you press this point, angry internet atheists will tend to try to pretend that they all but live within a Christian theocracy, which is oppressing them, or is about to. But that's too silly these days, even for most internet atheists. So mostly they just try to avoid the question. The result is that the angry internet atheist is self-selected for some sort of overriding need to engage in this kind of fighting. Individual motivations will vary, of course, but the one thing you can be fairly sure of is that they have some motivation for doing this. And since it can't be a rational motivation, since there are no rational reasons to do it, it must be an irrational motivation. And one of the things that you will learn in this life is, don't be surprised when a person acting on an overriding irrational motivation does not act rationally. There's another form of this that I'd like to take a look at before concluding. Whereas the example I chose from Randy starts off unfriendly in tone and gets more belligerent from there, you can find the same sort of thing but with far more skillful emotional manipulation. Consider the following example from atheist Derek. I'm an atheist, Chris, and I'm also English. Over here we don't have people like you. I respect all my friends who believe in a god, because of course they're entitled to their belief in such a thing. None of them think I have the intellect of a rock. They are good people, and wouldn't be so insulting. Now get yourself a nice cup of tea and a biscuit. Sit down and think hard about the following statement. Decide logically, which is the most likely. God didn't create people, people created God. It's the latter, isn't it? I've seen this sort of thing dozens of times, if not hundreds of times, but I like this one because it is especially succinct. It begins with implying that I've offended him in a way that would breach our ability to peacefully live next to each other as neighbors. This is the sort of social offense that human beings are constantly on the lookout for because we instinctively want to live in peace with the people right next to us. This is then followed by an indication that he's willing to reconcile, which is then followed by the terms of that reconciliation. For a normal human being, one's instincts will be screaming, Oh good, the damage isn't irreparable. Let's fix this problem now. Those same instincts will be urging that someone who can speak in such reasonable tones must be reasonable, and he must have misunderstood what I said so badly because of some problem in communication that can be easily cleared up. The problem is, this isn't true. You can see this because of how badly he's mischaracterized my video. If you haven't seen the video, when he says, "None of them think I have the intellect of a rock," he's referring to something I said about how the lack of belief definition of atheism is not only a bad definition, but it isn't even rhetorically advantageous for the atheist, because it would make rocks atheists, and so, since there's so many rocks, on average, atheists would be approximately as intelligent as rocks. He's attributing to me the consequent of a conditional whose premise I denied. Now, I have no way of knowing whether he mischaracterized what I said in my video so badly because he's dim-witted or, what would be much worse, because it served his purpose in trying to be emotionally manipulative. But if it's the former, he is so bad at thinking that he cannot understand a conditional, and if it's the latter, he's willing to pretend that he can't understand a conditional. Either way, there is nothing that will be accomplished by talking with him. To be clear, if he is merely extremely unintelligent, that does not reduce his value as a human being, and bringing the good news to him is as important as it is in bringing the good news to anyone else. If he is this unintelligent, though, the odds of it being accomplished through the written word are not, for a human being, distinguishable from zero. Written communication is intrinsically abstract and, lacking much of the context provided by the tone of voice, body language, etc., relies heavily on the reader to properly interpret it. What such a person needs is someone who can be in person with them and patiently win their trust and guide them over time at their pace. That's not going to happen in social media comments. That said, it is extremely unlikely that Derek is sufficiently unintelligent for this to be an honest mistake. For one thing, his vocabulary is too sophisticated, and his sentence construction is too complex. For another, and this is what I think is the most important evidence, the structure of the emotional manipulation is too well done. It shows too much of an understanding of the complexity of human nature. Moreover, the latter part is contingent on a particular reaction of mine to the first part, so the odds are extremely good that he's intelligent enough to understand what I said. He just didn't want to. Nothing good comes of talking with someone who doesn't want to understand you. I'd like to reiterate that I'm not interested in picking on Randy or Derek. They're by no means the worst I've seen, even just on the video they commented on. The only reason I picked their comments is that both struck me as particularly good for illustrating the point I wanted to make. I assume that this would truly go without saying, but please don't find these comments and try to engage with these people, especially if you're inclined to communicate disapprobation. The entire point of this video is that it won't do them any good. And that should always be the overriding concern of all interactions with atheists. What will do them good? That's what love is, after all. Willing the good of the other for his sake. That doesn't mean always being nice to people, but it does mean always being realistic about what might do them good. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.